noted early on, our nation's first treasurer, I believe, that the business of politics is business. This is what politicians occupy themselves with, this question. And it recognizes that business leaders are the principal decision makers in an economic system, in a market economic system, because they direct the investment stage. They're the ones making that decision to collect all those resources to then move it into production in a market system. And they seek out, and politicians seek them out, we'll get to that later on, because they want that politicians help guarantee that they make money, that those investments actually result in profits at the end of the cycle. All right? Especially as the investment gets more risky. So the more that I have to invest into it, the more I'm going to come to government to say, hey, make sure this doesn't fail. All right. So we talked about entrepreneurs as the coordinators of economic activity. So they decide, literally, what to produce, how to produce it, and who receives it, in the sense of they set the price. Now, granted, consumers will have some say in that. They'll even have some say in what goes into that product, in the sense of what they want, what they don't want. But entrepreneurs are the coordinators thereof. And I just mentioned that, motivated by profit. And another key point, and this, let's not forget this. Unlike elected officials, unlike our government, we don't elect entrepreneurs. We don't elect the decision makers in our corporate enterprises. We don't have a say in that, ever, really, except by buying their products or not buying their products. That's very important, because this is one of the weaknesses that some would argue of a market system, is that people are benefiting, people are making decisions that affect millions, thousands, if not millions of lives, who don't have to hold, or don't have to be held, or cannot be held even, accountable to those same people. And so it's a challenge, even in that way, for market systems, all right? All right, so if you take a break, now it's time to take it. If not, let's keep on going. Oops, over there. All right. All right, so the next phase to understand about the economy is overcoming deficiencies and errors. So we talked about how the command system can get it wrong, if you will, but even the market system can get it wrong. Let me explain. As we talked about the economy, things can fail. Investments can go awry, even on a large scale. One of the reasons why the stock market crash in 1929 happened was because too much money got invested in a certain value of product. Really, because the innocence that involved surrounded the stock market and involved surrounding investment in that day and age, in that age. You did not have the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. You did not have the other regulating bodies that made those who sell stock fairly represent the value of the stock they were selling. Meaning, just to use a very plain example, a person could bring to the stock market the sale of, let's say, some property down in Florida worth, let's say, $10,000. And they could sell 10 $1,000 shares, to make up that $10,000 of value. But in that time in 1929, there was no one guaranteeing that they only sold 10 shares of that stock at $1,000. They could have easily sold 100 shares of that stock at $1,000. And the reports, the historical reports, are that much of that type of activity was happening. And so what you result with, or the result of that, is what we call a bubble, an economic bubble. More money invested in a certain type or category of assets than there is value in those assets. So in our example, $100,000, if 100 shares were sold at $1,000 each, $100,000 invested in a property that was only worth $10,000. And to the tune that when that bubble burst, we saw that over 30% of the value of the economy was in a bubble. Basically, money chasing nothing, or empty value. We saw that same thing in the 2008 downturn. And it was the housing market, largely. In the downturn, there was even worse. So if you look only at the Fannie Mae stats, the stat was that Fannie Mae had about $6 trillion in bad assets, meaning money invested in it that did not have value. All right, $6 trillion. Our economy at that time was worth about $15 trillion. So literally 40% of the value in the economy was wasted in that one period of time in 2008. An even greater loss than during the stock market crash that gave way to the Great Depression. And you say, well, we didn't have the same type of conditions, if you remember the video, that they had in the Great Depression. We didn't have that in 2008. You're right. Mainly because of all the interventions that we had made between then and now. We're going to talk about one of those in a moment. All right? But nevertheless, I'm just trying to show you that even in a market system, that cycle can go wrong. So the investment equation, if you will, can go wrong. Things can happen, literally, investor decision making. Investors can get scared about their likelihood of making a profit and therefore not invest. Which was actually one of the reasons why the Great Depression lasted so long. One of the reasons why coming in the 08 Depression, interest rates were lowered so much, we'll talk about that in a moment, to convince investors, hey, you won't have to pay as much to borrow money, so therefore go ahead and invest some money. Take some loans, invest some money. So nevertheless, all that, we'll get into that a little bit more. But this is the goal, oftentimes, is to try, the goal of governments, I should say, in their managing the economy, is often to help the economy overcome those errors, those hiccups in that economic cycle, to keep that economic cycle going, okay? Keep that multiplier effect going, keep the economy growing, and to keep prices in check, because the other side of that coin is that the economy can speed up too much and prices go through the roof. Yeah, I'll leave that alone because we don't need to understand all the, how does inflation work, we don't need to understand all that. And a key actor in this role is the Federal Reserve. But before we even get to the Federal Reserve, let's talk about the intervention that FDR used in light of the crisis in the Great Depression. He used activity that was bolstered by the ism, if you will, of Keynesianism. Alan Maynard Keynes was the economist who came up with this notion that it is just as valuable in a society and can produce much the same positive effect if the government invests in the economy to move that cycle along compared to individual business persons. So his argument was, and is, that if business people aren't investing the way we want them to, in the volume or in the industries or whatever that we want them to, that government can step in and do that to keep things moving along. And FDR, believing that, led a lot of that investment. So he poured tons of money, like I said, putting money in people's pockets. FDR poured tons of money into the economy to keep it moving. President Barack Obama did the exact same thing in response to the 2008 economic downturn. He poured, if you remember, about 900 or 700 billion in stimulus into the economy to help keep things moving. Okay? And so that's all backed by this idea of Keynesianism, that the government can do the work of the private entrepreneurs and business people to keep things moving. Okay? Now, there's argument on that, and we'll get to the argument on that in a moment. I am hoping. Yes, I believe we will. All right, so I'm going to save the counter-argument to that Keynesian philosophy in a moment. And so this decision-making that controls this aspect is typically done not only through government investment and government stimulus, if you will, into the economy, but also through monetary policy, meaning controlling the money supply. And we have to understand this first, how we do this, all right? So let me go to our diagram over here. Sorry, that didn't actually work. Let's try that again. Okay. Why is it not working on me? Ah, that's why. Hold on. I apologize for this. Exactly. There we go. Sorry about that. All right. So we have to understand where money comes from. I'm going to try to move quickly on this. So the interesting thing about our money is that our money does not actually come from the government per se. All right? technically it comes from the Federal Reserve, and we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve a little bit more in a moment, but it comes from that central bank of our government, okay? So if you actually had a dollar bill, I actually have 20 in my pocket, right at the top of the dollar bill, you will see, I'll let you look at your own dollar bill, it says Federal Reserve Note, okay? That means that this bill technically belongs to the Federal Reserve. It's their property, if you will. But it also has the emblem of the United States of America on it, and it operates, if you will, it's government sanctioned or government use of private property for governmental purposes. All right, that's very important. And so how does then banks and the central bank make money? All right, how do they produce money? Very rudimentary example. We're going to try to move very quickly through this. So let's say that a bank has $1 million in assets. All right? These assets are literally your savings. All right? Actually, let me erase this. They're your savings. They're literally the money that you put in into the bank. Not only you, but you and a whole bunch of other people. And the bank is sitting on that. So how does then the bank make money in the sense of profit, but also make money in the sense of putting more money into the economy? They make it through loans. Okay? So let's say the bank has this 1 million. The bank can then, if the reserve rate, and I know I'm getting a little technical, if the reserve rate is 2%, all right? Let me use 10% to keep it real easy. If the reserve rate is 10%, then that means the bank can go out and loan $100 million, holding in its possession I'm sorry, I'm using wrong numbers. Forgive me, y'all. The bank can go out and loan $10 million, using in reserve $1 million as a guarantee, if you will, on those loans. All right? And then, of course, the interest that is paid on those loans is what results to the bank as profit. So the interest equal profits for the bank. But the difference between what's in cash at the bank and what they loaned, put this loaned, and then cash, that $9 million difference is literally new money in the economy. This bank, in making these decisions, putting out this amount of loans based on the reserve rate, we're going to get to all that, just produced $9 million more in money in the economy. And you can say, well, what's that based on? Well, it's based on the expectation that that $9 million invested in those enterprises will multiply to produce sufficient to cover that $9 million loaned and the interest involved, and put money in paychecks in people's pockets and profit in the entrepreneur's pocket. Paychecks in workers' pockets and profit in the entrepreneur's pockets. All right? So this is how banks make money. The Federal Reserve regulates these banks. The Federal Reserve sets the reserve rates and controls the interest rates that the borrowers have to pay to these banks. Now I'm simplifying that a little bit, but that's in essence what happens, okay? There's a little more complexity to it, but that's in essence what happens. So the Federal Reserve control inflation and manage the economy by lowering, raising interest rates, making it cheaper for when they want more activity, they make interest rates lower. When they want less activity, they make interest rates higher, make it more expensive. They regulate the banks, what they have to keep in reserve to make sure that they don't fail. Trying to overcome that too big to fail concept, if you remember that from the 2008 crisis. And also controlling the money supply in terms of bonds, but we won't get into all that. That's not super critical. Just know that it is the Federal Reserve that does this. So let's talk a little bit about the politics of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, first, is a private company that operates as a government central bank, the central bank of our government, of our national government. So it's a private company given government privilege, if you will. And interestingly enough, the key is it's designed to be largely independent of the political systems. Largely, not completely, largely. What do I mean by that? Its members are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, that's political, but to 14-year terms. President can only serve for 8. Yes, a senator might have a 14, serve more than 14 years, but the president not. And so, again, free from direct influence from the president. However, the president does name the chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve. So the president has some influence that way, in the sense that more than likely they're going to appoint someone, when they get the opportunity to appoint someone, who favors their type of policy. But not completely. Because once they designate that person, and once that person's been confirmed, they're free to do, to direct the economy as they see fit. Which to say, toward the goals of stabilizing and growing the economy. And we know what they're trying to do. There's nothing willy-nilly over here. They're trying, their goals are already set in policy. That's why they have those privileges. But what they decide does affect their policy. So let's get back to our 2008 example. When the downturn happened in 2008, yes, President Obama injected, and the Congress, injected $700 to $900 billion, forgive me, I'm forgetting the actual figure, into the economy. The Fed Reserve injected $2.1 billion. Largely stunting and elongating the effect of that bubble burst. So the Fed Reserve did its job, if you will, of trying to stabilize the economy on the eve, and really on the occasion of the worst downturn in U.S. history. That's why we didn't feel it as much. So, nevertheless, our central bank is a key actor. Very important to understand that when talking about politics and policy. The central bank is organized into 12 districts. The Board of Governors being 12, there we go, 12 districts. Basically geographically dispersed based on population. That's why you have some of these bigger regions, if you will, around here, and some of these smaller regions over here. It's more populated in our country over here than it is over there. They are literally the ones that we put in charge of helping to stabilize, helping to overcome the errors in our economy. All right? So, when we're talking about economics, we're talking about who is directing the activity in the economy. So, what's the relationship between the government and the individuals in that relationship? We talk about how do we overcome the errors in that. And now we're going to talk about a third part. So, if you want to take another break, here's the time to take that break. Oh, hold on. Let me do this again. Sorry. And we're back. All right. The third step in that, in understanding the economy, is this aspect. The setting and achieving of collective economic goals. So we talked about one function of government is collective action. There are goals we're trying to achieve collectively. And this is exactly where social policy enters the realm of economic policy. All right? So we talked about the main economic concerns, scarcity and provision. Early on in the U.S. history, the government had a very limited role in the economy. Basic infrastructure, like canals and ports and things like that. Roads even were left largely to individuals to build for the sake of transporting their goods to different places. And so that laissez-faire, which is another name for free market, meaning government not be involved in the market, was very popular. State governments were more involved than federal government. We've been saying that for a while now. You should get that as a major theme. States were more involved than the federal government. But the tariffs were very important. It was the main source, I won't say the main source, but it was a key source of income for the federal government. And of course, as our nation was growing, we were still doing a lot of commerce with other nations. And so what we charged, the taxes, if you will, that we charged on those products when they came in, and what other nations charged on our products when we sent them out, that was a very big deal. All right. In terms of social policy, meaning in terms of helping the defenseless, all right, helping those who were left out. You remember we talked about philanthropy by association, how people were receiving a lot of their social assistance by their civic organizations or churches or other groups like that. The federal government was not doing a whole lot of that. Where states had gotten involved, they got involved in the area of education. And every state had done this, and not every state had done that universally. Texas had, but many others had not. And in terms of crime prevention. So keeping it safe, if you will, for folks. But then, of course, in response to the Great Depression and that trajectory that was set by FDR, that changed as of the 1930s. We talked about that. New Deal, massive expansion under the Keynesian philosophy, that the central government best actor to solve these problems. Even if you don't believe it was motivated by, let's say, these altruistic motives, cynics might say that one reason to do this was to try to get citizens, if you will, owing something to the political party that happened to push this philosophy, which was the Democratic Party. We talked about those. So, taxation. So we talked about how in the economy, the third thing that we do with our paychecks and profit, we pay taxes. Well, we pay taxes in a whole bunch of different ways in this system. Income and payroll taxes tend to go to the federal government. However, sales taxes tend to go to state governments. Property taxes tend to go to local governments. We have duties and tariffs that goes to the federal government, and then both states and federal governments have their taxes. So we have a lot of taxes that are collected, if you will, for the sake of funding the things that we want to do collectively, the things that cost money to provide collectively. There is a notion that we need to understand in terms of taxes, progressive versus regressive, okay? I won't go into this whole deep amount, but we need to understand it basically. All right, so new slide. So progressive taxes are taxes where the more you make, the more you pay. So if you earn more, you pay more. All right? That's progressive. Very simple. Regressive is the opposite, where somehow those who earn less nevertheless pay more. Now, just on its face, most of us would say, that ain't right. That, those who earn less shouldn't be paying more. And this is where the argument starts to enter on this. Is it even fair that those who earn more pay more? You might argue, well, they have more, therefore they can stand to pay more. They have more, they have more wiggle room, if you will. They have more margin. But they might argue, no, it should be that everyone pays the same proportion, okay? And so there are multiple aspects to this debate. There's a question of proportionality. Think literally percentage. Do the poor pay a greater percentage of their income than do the rich? And then there's an aspect of just total amount of money, actual quantity of cash. Because many those who are wealthy would argue that they carry the larger load in terms of the total cash that is paid in taxes coming from the wealthy, even if it's a smaller percentage of their wealth. The wealthy would also argue that it's more of their money that's being invested in the economy that keeps moving the economy along, therefore they shouldn't be taxed as much. But almost no one thinks that it's right that those who earn less pay more, whether that be proportionally and especially not in terms of actual dollar values. In terms of those various taxes that we looked at, let me go back there. One more time. Income and property taxes are designed, at least at the federal level, to be progressive, where those who earn more pay more. You see those in the tax rates, that they go up as your income goes up. Sales tax, on the other hand, unfortunately, has still proven to be regressive. Same thing with property taxes. Even though property taxes tend to go with the value of your house, oftentimes they're capped at certain levels, whatever. But sales tax, definitely property tax to a certain extent, tend to be regressive. Because poor folks are spending more of their money in stores and in such a way that those products are subject to sales tax than are wealthier people. And so there's this debate of progressive versus regressive even within the tax system. Something to understand. And so with this tax money that comes in, what do we do with it? Remember, we're talking about collective goals, achieving collective economic goals. What do we do with it? Well, we use them to fund what are called distributive policies, meaning things that we simply want collective goods that we simply want government to provide to everyone. So things like national defense, infrastructure, other items like that. We pay for those. And so these are specifically these public goods. If you remember, we talked about public goods before, where we don't want anyone excluded from it, and one person's using it doesn't keep anyone else from using it. So goods that are more like this is what we pay for with in distributor policies. Like I said, infrastructure, things like that. Education is one of those things that we treat like this. And this is a very important part here, that a lot of times there are goods that we could exclude people from. Or that eventually enough people using it keeps other people from using it. I mean, there's a certain limit. So beach access, if you will, or even education. You know, you put so many students in that classroom, the instruction from that teacher starts lacking. But we treat those like public goods because we don't want to exclude anyone from it. We don't want that anyone miss out on it, that any one person's consumption of it keeps somebody else from consuming it. And so oftentimes what we're trying to do with our collective goods and these taxes that we collect is we're trying to provide these other types of goods that that we want to treat like public goods. Okay? So education, housing, many of those, old age assistance, Medicaid, Medicare, are many of those types of things, healthcare, many of those types of things. Yes, absolutely we can exclude people from it. For that matter, many argue that healthcare is a private good that we're trying to provide publicly, and therein be the difficulty. But nevertheless, you got some of that. Then you have redistributive policies, okay? And this is not just distributive policies, not just providing for public goods and those traditional public goods, but literally trying to equalize the wealth, distribute the wealth in a more equal way. If you remember that from our the weakness of the market system, it's inequitable. Market system, just by very nature, is going to reward some people more than it rewards others. Well, our redistributive policies are one way we try to balance that out, if you will, specifically on behalf of the poor. And then, as you see down here, some policies are both distributive and redistributive. College aid, in the sense that we want everyone to be able to get higher education if their job requires it. But redistributive in the sense that those who don't have money are the ones who are typically borrowing to go to college. So the poor are borrowing from the rich, if you will. All right? As you can see, historically, since the World War II era, social policy spending has grown up significantly. And what should be here is a similar line showing the population growth, because you would see that it's largely consistent but not completely. Social program spending has outpaced population growth, but not by the gargantuan margin that this tends to convey. But it has led to this, deficits. We have this situation where, at least since the 1970s, we've been spending more in taxes than we collect, spending more in programs than we collect in taxes. And that we have been accumulating this debt upon debt upon debt year after year after year after year. And so we find ourselves in a situation where we are largely in debt. Just to show you this graphically, you can see it in two different forms. First, in the deficit as a percentage of GDP. So earlier on, our deficits, we were running here we ran a negative deficit, but most of these other years, this graph is not, I don't want to use this graph, I'm sorry, that doesn't convey what I'm trying to say. Not because it disagrees with me, but it's not really accurate. But this one is, where you see the deficit and the total U.S. debt, I should say. Deficit is the more annual measure, total debt is the accumulated measure of GDP, of the deficit, or the debt, I'm sorry, in terms of GDP. So you can see that, you know, coming off of the boom, if you will, baby boom in the 1960s, our deficit grew a little bit because, well, we had the Great Generation retiring, those Army veterans retiring, and so we were paying a lot out to them. Many of them passed in that era shortly thereafter, and so our deficits dropped. But then we started expanding our social spending again with the expansion of Medicaid, Medicare, HUD, and so we grew a little bit there. Reagan gets in office, shrinks it a bit, and same thing with Clinton. So Reagan to Bush to Clinton, we saw a shrinking of that deficit. But then since George Bush's son and continuing thereon, that deficit has done nothing but grow. This is projected in terms of this year, but we know history being what it is now, that deficit has continued to grow. And so now let's merge all this to ideology. So why do we get all this? What does it matter? Let's put the ideology with it. So when we look at your philosophy, a person's philosophy in terms of what they want economically for the country, what they want socially for the country. The school of thought that says that the government should stay out of both. That it's not the place for government to jump in and direct the economy. It's not the place for government to jump in and try to equalize incomes or provide collective goods. That's a libertarian mindset. I'm sorry, I got too close to the screen again. All right? It says government should stay out. Tea Partiers tend to be of this mindset, that government has gone way too far and that we'd be better off if government just stayed out altogether. All right? Those of FDR day and age, and actually I would put them more in this era here, but I'll leave it alone. Yeah, that's where I would put them. I think this is mislabeled, the way the textbook puts it. But that government should step in and regulate the economy, meaning government should definitely try to move us through those errors. Government should definitely try to move us into growth, even into certain industries that are more advantageous than certain other industries. Those tend to be liberal, especially those who would argue that the government should also get involved to help equalize incomes and equalize, achieve all those collective goals that we want economically. So that's where I would put liberal. I would put liberal here. Sorry, I'm getting too close to the screen. And then the conservatives would be those who would say government should stay out of economic activity, but that government, and I would even regulate social policy, but that government should respect the role of other actors in providing some of these social goods. Infrastructure, yes, but social goods, no. So even things like education, things like welfare, things like old age assistance, that there needs to be more of a public-private partnership, meaning that there's a third sector. There are other actors in society, civic clubs, philanthropic groups, who can step in to partner with government to make sure we provide those things in a way that's fair, equitable, efficient, those kind of things. And so that's what I would describe as conservative. All right? Exactly, I just explained that. All right. So that's our general principles on the economy. Let me make sure that nothing other slides here. Yep. All right, this is where I'll end with. All right. So, it's like we talked about a lot, but we haven't got any Bible in this yet. All right, here's our Bible. Shouldn't civil government be primarily responsible for society's welfare? All right? And I will take you to one verse, Romans 13.